My name is Jocelyn Nicholas. I am a realtor here in Southern Ontario. I am also a real estate investor. I started my career actually as an investor. I used to work for the provincial government as an economist, and I used my income at the time to buy some properties. I've been an investor for the last 7 years, and I own properties in Hamilton, Guelph, and Kitchener-Waterloo. So today we'll be talking about people who own properties in Guelph, Hamilton, and Kitchener-Waterloo. I went to school in Hamilton, so I was at McMaster for 4 years. I did my master's at Laurier, so I was in Kitchener-Waterloo for another 2 years. And now I'm here in Guelph. So I live in Guelph, and I do own some properties here near the university as well. So I have the experience to talk about McMaster, Laurier, and Waterloo, as well as University of Guelph. My superpower, if I was to pick one, it'll be in building wealth through real estate. I came to Canada with nothing, and I've seen what real estate can do, not only for my family, but also for my clients and my colleagues, friends, and family who are also investors. So I do believe that real estate is definitely the way to build wealth. So today we will be looking at, I'll give a quick market update as to what's happening right now in the real estate market. So much has changed in the last year. And we'll also look at some tenant rights. I know that the list is longer, as well as landlord rights, but I will only focus on the things that apply in this area of selling and buying a tenanted property. So I know that when I present the list is going to look really short, but that's okay. I'm only looking at those things that pertain to selling and buying a property that is tenanted. I'll also give some practical advice and examples from my experience as a realtor, but also as an investor. I do sell some tenanted properties, some of them my own. So I'd like to bring that to the table, and hopefully that will inspire you, or that will deepen the level of understanding in this area. I'll also go through a checklist for selling a tenanted student rental. So if somebody is on the path to sell a student rental, I will give some ideas, things you should be thinking about. But again, as I said, sometimes we have to look at the situation specifically. So if you would like me to look at your situation, we can also have a one-on-one consultation to do that. So for a quick market update, I'm pretty sure most of you would know, but the Bank of Canada has been increasing the overnight rate. It went up from 0.25 in February to now we are at 4.25. And there are talks for more hikes in the future. It will depend on how the economy is doing. Right now, from what I've heard in the industry, is that there are 2 more hikes coming, one coming on January 25th and another coming in March. So those 2 are likely to happen. What I've seen in the last few months as rates go up is that every time rates go up, prices come down a bit. And if we were to look at the market, the way it's performing, prices have gone up by approximately 25% if you're outside the GTA. So Kitchener-Waterloo, Guelph, and Hamilton, prices have come down by approximately 25%. And that is because affordability has changed. We're seeing fewer buyers in the market due to, some people just aren't sure. If we were to start with the investor pool, investors simply aren't buying because the numbers aren't making sense. It is harder to cash flow right now on a property. So we're seeing that a lot of the investor pool has kind of, cooled down, but we're also seeing affordability issues. So in February, the qualifying rate was around 4.2%. And now with the increase in interest rates, the qualifying rate has gone up to about 7%. Actually, maybe even higher than 7%. So that is making it harder for people to qualify for mortgages. With the instability, a lot of people are also losing jobs. We're seeing businesses struggling with, because, they have fewer and fewer buyers, less revenue. So definitely self-employed right now, it's harder for some of them to get mortgages. So definitely that is also reducing the buyer pool. So definitely the market has changed. We're also seeing higher inventory than we had in February, which means that when a property goes to market, you have more competition. So for properties to sell, they have to show really well. And what I mean by this is we have to, because in the last few months in February, there was just no home, there was just not enough homes on market for the amount of buyers that were looking for homes. So it was easy to sell a property, but right now things have changed. Your home has to show really well. In some cases, we have to stage it, we have to make sure it's nice and clean, curb appeal, all those things. That's what it's taking to sell a home right now. So when you're working with a realtor to sell your home, make sure that the home shows really well and that they're doing the best they can to expose the home to as many people as possible, which is why I wanted to dive deeper into selling a student rental, because a lot of student rentals right now, and I lived in student rentals, so I know some of them might need repairs or upgrades here and there, because as a student, sometimes when things break, they don't even bother to report it to the landlord. So that is something that we could definitely look into and see how to fix it before the property goes to market. So I'm finding that we're selling tenanted student rentals. Timing is key. And if I could say one takeaway from today is that you have to make sure that this is timed right. For Guelph and Kitchener-Waterloo, a lot of students are signing new leases on May 1st. For Hamilton, sometimes it changes. Some sign in September 1st, but definitely for these two markets, Guelph and Kitchener-Waterloo, we're looking at May 1st leases. And that is a very key point, because if a student is on a lease and the lease expires May 1st, you still need to give them 60 days notice. So I'm finding that the best time to sell a property that is tenanted is somewhere before the end of February. And the reason for that is that when you sell before the end of February, that gives you the whole month of March and the whole month of April to give the student notice. If you push it beyond February, then you're tapping into June 1st leases, which might not be good for the students, because a lot of them need to get a place by May 1st. It might also not be good for the new buyers, because if you're selling it to another investor, they need a tenant as of May 1st. So I find that this is a crucial deadline that we have to keep in mind as we're selling student rentals. Another observation also is that students are usually busy in March and April, especially mid-March, because that's when the deadlines are coming up for all the assignments. So a lot of the students are busy. I found during the last year when we were selling student rentals, it was much harder to get people to go through the homes in April, because students were mostly at home. They were writing their exams at home online. And if they have an exam and there's a showing, you basically don't have access to that room because the students writing their exam. So I find, especially in this market, last year, it wasn't so bad because the market was active. So we saw buyers who would make offers without seeing rooms in the house, right? If there's 2 rooms are not available, they would still make an offer on the property. Right now, the way the market is, the buyer is a little bit more careful. They want to make sure they've done all their due diligence. So if this happens, if let's say they come and the property is not accessible, that could mean they have to come back another time, or maybe they'll find something else that is more accessible. So we want to avoid that and make sure that the timeline and the schedule exposes the property to as many buyers as possible in a short time, as compared to waiting longer. Another thing too that I'm seeing with a lot of student rentals is that sometimes as landlords or as sellers, we forget that these students are also tenants. So they are protected by the LTB, the Landlord Tenant Board. We have to make sure that we're following regulations. We have to make sure that everything we're doing is right. There is a perception in the market, which is wrong, that when you rent out property to a student, then you don't have to follow the rules because it's considered as rooming house, but that is not really correct. The tenants, they're paying rent on a monthly basis and they have a lease in place, which means they're protected by the rules and regulation. So I always like to bring that to landlords' attention, that we have to make sure we're following the rules. And as it comes to the rights of these students, they have the right to occupy the rental unit, especially if they have a fixed lease, and as well as if they have a month-to-month lease. So I've had people who ask me, can I sell my property and they're on a month-to-month lease, can I just get them out? And in most cases, that is not the case. You have to still make sure that you follow the rules. And I'll get into that in the next slide as to how to do it right. There's only 1 or 2 ways, maybe even 3 ways as to how you can get a property vacant. And selling is not one of them. Just because you're selling doesn't mean that you have the right to get the students out. We have to make sure that we're giving them proper documentation, because I've actually seen that a lot of students know their rules. They know what their rights as well. So we don't want to get you in trouble. We want to make sure that we're involving the proper professionals to do the work properly so that there's no lawsuits or any other damages following the sale of the property. We also have to give them 24-hour notice for accessing the property. I've seen students who say, you know what, it's okay, you don't have to really give me that time. But that is a conversation that can be had and has to be a mutual agreement between the tenant and the landlord. As I was just saying in the last slide, we have to give a minimum 60 days notice if the tenant is on a month-to-month lease for the property to be vacated. I've seen some interesting situations where people sign the agreement of purchase and sale without paying attention to the vacant possession clause. They agree to a vacant possession without really following the rules properly, and come closing day, and the tenant still has the right to occupy the property. You haven't given them notice, and you've already agreed to providing vacant possession to the new buyers. That can create a lot of problems. And in some cases also, in this market, it could mean that the buyer walks away, because with the 60 days that they have between the day they buy the property and closing, a lot more deals will come to the market. Rates will change and people find better deals on the market. So we don't want that happening. We have to make sure that whatever we're doing is correct and that it doesn't bring any problems after the transaction is closed. Another point is, as a landlord, you cannot interfere with the tenant's reasonable enjoyment of a rental unit. What that means is if, for example, with students who work from home or they have exams, we have to respect that. If they have an exam, we cannot barge into the room or force our way into the property simply because we are the landlord or simply because we have the right to access the property. We have to make sure that we're still cooperating and that we're respecting the reasonable enjoyment of the rental unit. I've actually seen in most cases that cooperation works better. And this also speaks to tenants at large. When I'm selling a tenanted property, I find that it's much easier and better process when I get the tenants to cooperate and to work with me so that I can sell the property sooner and they can go back to normal life much sooner than if I try to compete and go against them. So in most cases, I find if I can work with them, if I can cooperate with them, see what works for them and find a way to make sure that we're getting a win-win. For example, I have tenants who say, okay, I will go away for 1 week or 2 weeks. You have access to the property. Just make sure that, you do everything you can to sell the property so I can come back to normal life. And I'll agree to that. I'll say, you know what, I'll do my very best. We'll promote the property. We'll do everything we can. And you give us two weeks. So they go somewhere. Some of them have gone on vacation for 2 weeks. And by the time they come back, the property is sold and they go back to normal life. So sometimes we do get to, those win-win situations, but again, highlighting that it has to come from a place of cooperation other than competition. So as a landlord, you have the right to sell your property. Even though it's tenanted, nobody is going to stop you from selling your property. It's your property, so you get to decide when you want to keep it or when you want to sell it. You also have the right to inspect the property and make repairs as needed. And you also have the right to enter the property with proper notice. So some practical advice. When it comes to selling a property, there are 2 ways to do it. One way is where you get the buyer to assume the tenant. And another way, which I'll get to in the next section, is where you provide vacant possession to the property. Basically, when you get the buyer to assume the tenants, that reduces the pool of buyers to just investors only. And the reason for that is if the buyer assumes the tenant, that means the tenant still occupies the premises, and you cannot, as a buyer, you cannot move into that property unless you give proper notice. And that could take, at least 60 days in Ontario. So I would like for investors who are thinking to do this to think twice, because sometimes your return on investment will go down simply because the pool of buyers is reduced to investors only. This usually in most cases reduces the sale price, because again, we have fewer buyers, as opposed to if we could open up the pool of buyers to, investors as well as people who are going to move into the property. So this is something that we usually have to discuss. However, if the tenants are on a lease, I've seen situations, especially with student rentals, where the students have a 2-year or 3-year lease. So if they have a lease in place, the only option you have as an investor is to sell it as an investment, where the tenants are assumed by the new buyer. So that might not be optional if they're on a lease. Another way to sell a tenanted property, as I was just saying, is providing vacant possession to the buyer. This usually opens up opportunities for investors as well as regular buyers, people who are going to move into the property, to buy the property. Now, there are 2 ways legally accepted by the government to get vacant possession. One is through an N11, which is by signing an agreement to end the tenancy. This method can also be used in situation A, where the tenants are on a lease, but you can sign an N11, which is a mutual agreement to end the tenancy with the tenants. Some people call this method cash for keys. And again, cooperation is key. This is where you approach the tenants and negotiate with them and see what's important to them versus what's important to you, and reach a win-win situation. We saw a lot of these situations in 2020, when all of a sudden school was online. Students did not need to go into the university on a regular basis. So a lot of them went back to their hometowns, and they were willing to sign a mutual release to get out of a lease. And the landlord then would have the opportunity to sell it as a vacant property. Sometimes in certain situations, I see N11s used where the landlord is willing to pay a certain amount of money to get the tenants to agree to signing this mutual release. Again, this is absolutely negotiable. There's no set amount, but you have to make sure that whatever you're doing, my advice is work with a paralegal. We do have a team of paralegals who know what they're doing, and they're really good at their job. I'm not a paralegal, so I usually don't try to get involved in this process, but the best I can do is provide you a contact or a good paralegal who can make sure that the paperwork is done right. Because we've seen a lot of lawsuits come in with N11s and N12. You have to make sure that whatever you do, you work with a good professional who will protect you, who will protect your best interest, as well as treat the tenant fairly, right? So when it comes to N11s, definitely both parties have to agree, and there are different ways of coming to an agreement, either by paying them or by looking at what works best for them. In this case, if they're looking to move elsewhere, or they are not in school anymore, they change their mind, those are all things that you can talk and negotiate and get to a place of mutual agreement. Another way is by serving the N12. We see this a lot with parents who are buying student rentals for their kids to use. For example, if I have a client whose son or daughter going to the university and they're looking to buy a property for their son or daughter, an N12 can be used in this case, but this is only used when the tenant is on a month-to-month lease. So if you have a lease in place, the N12 cannot be used until the lease ends. So in this case, for the N12, we have to consider, when does the lease end? If the lease is ending, let's say in this case, we're in January. If the lease ends as of April 30th, that means that we can sell the property and aim to close May 1st. And we can serve notice to the tenants, notifying them that a new owner will be moving in. Again, for the N12, I prefer to use a professional who can come in and serve the documents properly. I've seen, like working with other realtors as well, I have a situation that, since I'm giving practical advice, I just have to give an example. I had a situation where an N12 was served to a tenant, and it was drafted by either the homeowner or the realtor, one of them. They served the N12, but they put the wrong date. So every single thing they put in these documents counts. So the tenant, they knew the rules, they knew the regulations. So they waited until it was closer to closing. And they said, look, you served me notice asking me to move out in May 1st, but legally I'm supposed to move out as of April 30th. So this is not the right documentation. It's wrong. You have to do it again. So legally, they'd have to correct the paperwork and serve it again and give them another 60 days notice. And you can tell that the tenants knew what they were doing because they waited until it was closer to closing. They knew that the landlord didn't have enough time to wait. So because they've already sold the property and they agreed to vacant possession, they had to pay the tenant to move out. Literally, these things happen. So they could have avoided that. And I think they end up paying a lot of money, maybe upwards of 10,000. So it's something that has to be done with a professional. The professionals, like the fee that you pay to the professional is much less than what you'd pay otherwise. So that's why I always advise to work with a professional, in this case, a Polarigo, who can do the paperwork, make sure that you're protected as a landlord. Another thing too, when we write the agreement of purchase and sale, we have to make sure, if we're on the sell side, we have to make sure that the new buyer will actually move in. And one of the best ways to do that is to get them to sign an affidavit, because if indeed they get the seller, in most cases, what happens is the buyer will direct the seller to serve notice because the seller still has a relationship with the tenant. So in that case, if they do it and they don't move in, the seller could be sued as well. So we have to make sure that the buyer signs an affidavit stating that they or their family member will move into the property as soon as they get vacant possession. The LTB will fine landlords up to 50,000 if proven to have acted in bad faith. We've seen it where buyers will just say, oh, I'll move in, or my son will move in, and maybe they keep it vacant for 3 months and they rent it out. When that happens, you can definitely get sued. So, and I've seen lawsuits too in the industry where people get sued for not doing things properly. So as sellers, you definitely want to be protected, because more and more it's happening, and a lot of tenants are becoming more and more aware of their rights. So we have to make sure that we're doing things right so that we're not being sued. If you're thinking about selling a tenanted property, here are some things that you need to be thinking about. First of all, we need to think about the timeline based on the situation. You know, when would you like to sell? If you have a student rental in Kitchener-Waterloo and Guelph, McMaster included too. However, for McMaster, sometimes students sign a lease for September 1st, but majority of these properties, students are moving on May 1st. So we need to think about that and know that you need to give them 60 days notice legally. If they're not planning to stay, if they're planning to stay, you need to give them 60 days notice. So the best time to sell is definitely before the end of February. So you have the whole month of March and you have the whole month of April as notice to the tenants. Don't sign new leases. If you're thinking to sell, I know a lot of students also know that they have to renew their intention to stay in the property, or they have to renew their lease 60 days before it expires. So if you're planning on selling or you're thinking about selling, do not sign a new lease. In fact, just keep it on a month-to-month basis. Even if you don't intend on selling this window between now and February, I would say still keep it on a month-to-month basis, just so that allows you the flexibility to sell at a later date. Say if you decide to sell in November, you can sell your property and you can still issue an N12, and the tenants will vacate the property. It's sad for them because a lot of students move in May 1st, so they might not be able to find another convenient student rental. But for you as a landlord, you still have the option to sell whenever you'd like. Another thing I would recommend if you're thinking about selling the property is to inspect the property to assess the condition. As I said, I see it quite often where property is damaged or something is leaking and the students do not report it to the landlord. A lot of them actually don't even know that it's a good thing to tell the landlord what's happening. They just think that they don't want to bother the landlord or they don't want to complain about small things. So they end up not reporting things that need to be repaired. So as a landlord, my advice to you is inspect the property and assess the condition. If there's anything leaking, if there's any sign of water, usually people who are looking to buy in this market, water is a bad thing to see in a property because water brings about mold and all kinds of issues that we don't want to see. So definitely, I do have a list of repairs to be made to increase your return on investment. So if you'd like to know what repairs to do to your property before you go to market, please let me know. There are things that increase the return on investment, as opposed to, there are repairs that if you do, you definitely get your money back. And there are repairs that are just a waste of money. So if you are thinking about making repairs to your property, as I said, I'm an investor as well. I do renovations all the time. So please let me know and I could send you a list of those items as well as the return on investment to make sure that the money you're investing will come back. So if you're now decided you know which timeline you want to sell your property within, and you also don't have leases or your lease is coming to an end and you've assessed all the damage to the property, now you need to think about informing the tenants about your plans to sell. Usually I do this as a way to establish trust between you and the tenants, because if they wake up one day and they see a sign on the lawn, trust and the relationship that you have will definitely be damaged, because they think that maybe you don't trust them enough or you're going behind their back. The best I've seen is to start having that conversation. That also prepares them for what's coming. I've also seen situations where the tenants will tell their parents that the landlord is selling and the parent will just buy it. So that is also something, but it doesn't always happen. But informing the tenants about your plans to sell prepares them for what's coming and also strengthens the relationship. As I said, we're always looking for cooperation, not competition. So if indeed you're sure that selling is the next step, I would say, inform them, tell them that you're planning to sell. You may not know when, but you're thinking about selling. That way they're prepared and they know what's coming. Then point number 5 is start making repairs. Now you know what needs to be done, but make sure that you're spending your money where it's needed the most. I guess on this point is, as I said, I have a list of the things, for example, things like bathrooms. If you spend your money on bathrooms, you definitely get it back. However, if you spend money on a roof, it might not come back, because when people, it's good to have the return on investment on your roof is definitely less than a return on investment on bathrooms. And I do have a complete list of what you can do to make those repairs and make the property show. Okay, the first question that I have right now was submitted ahead of time, and it says, do you think it's a good time to sell right now? That is a good question. I think that it depends on the situation. If you are in a place where you really have to sell, then definitely it's a good time to sell. I have some clients who are selling right now simply because their son or daughter is graduating from the university and they don't want the hassle of holding the property. If that is you, then definitely it's a good time to sell. However, if you don't have to sell, then don't feel the pressure to sell. Let me put it this way. If you can hold the property for 2 years, maybe consider holding it, because the way the market is, it's a little bit, it's not, the market has changed. So the expectation that we had as investors in January and February is definitely not the case. However, with the right strategy and the right marketing, we can still get your property sold. And to answer the question, is it a good time to sell or not? It just depends on your situation. My advice to the person who's asking this question is, let's meet and see your situation. And the kind of investor I am, I would never encourage someone to sell if I don't think it's the right thing to do. I think my job is to help my clients achieve their goals, get to where they want to go. And if it's not the right time to sell, I would definitely let you know, especially if you still have a fixed rate mortgage and your mortgage is really low and you can rent it out and get cash flow. I would rather see you build wealth than sell a property and and lose money. So if you have like a 2% rate mortgage and it's fixed and it's easy to cash flow, we could definitely look at the situation and get you cash flowing instead of selling, and maybe plan to sell in 2 years. However, if you're in a place where you have to sell, we could also look at that situation and plan ahead. Second question is, should I fix my student rental before selling it? In this market, absolutely. If you asked me this question in February, I would have said no, put it on market. People are buying anything and everything. So the way the market is right now, there's just a little bit more competition. So we have to make sure that the homes shows the best. We have to stand out against the competition. So yes, we have some repairs to do. However, as I said, not everything brings a good return on your investment in terms of repairs. We have to make sure that the repairs you're doing will actually bring your money back, that the money you're spending is coming back. Because as investors, we're all about return, right? So we want to make sure that your money is spent where it's needed the most. Question number 3 is, what is considered a good positive cash flow for student rentals? To be honest with you, in this market, and to be honest, it changes. Right now, the way the rates are, from an investor perspective, rates are so high. So if you're covering your expenses, that is a good thing, because I know a lot of properties, especially those investors who are buying single family homes, those homes are not cash flowing right now. Also, investors who are buying condos aren't cash flowing because you have to pay a higher rate. And at the same time, you have to pay your condo fees, your taxes, and all that, and it's not cash flowing. So from an investor perspective, right now, if all your expenses are covered for, it's definitely a good place to be in. And when rates come down or when things stabilize in the next few months or even a year to 2, then you can refinance. Good cash flow for me is about $1,000. So in my portfolio, a lot of my properties are bringing in $1,000 cash flow. However, with rates changing and some of my mortgages are variable, I'm seeing 500, maybe 400 in some other properties. But the important thing for me, because we're in a tough market, the important thing is to make sure that my properties are covering all of my expenses. The worst thing I can do is have a property that needs me to put money in it, because things are already tight. It's better when your property can take care of itself. A lot of single family homes aren't doing that. So to answer the question, it really depends on your situation. I like to see $1,000 cash flow every month on my properties. However, I'm just as happy if my property is covering all of its expenses. Single family homes will not do that, which is why I don't own a lot of single family homes. A lot of my properties are multifamily. Okay, I think I have a question here from someone who's on here. Question is, if anyone needs leasing services to help with repairs and management. Oh, this is someone who's promoting their services. They're also interested in buying student rentals at the moment. If you're selling, let me know. You can connect with me, Paul, and we can discuss this and take it from there. Especially if you're looking to buy more, I definitely do have some leads that I think you might be interested in. Question number 4. When should you buy student rental property? Is there a good month to do so? So this is going to definitely depend on your situation. When should you buy? I think if you're a parent and your child is coming to school, I find a lot of parents would rather buy and close in September when their child is here. So that is an option. However, if you're buying as an investor, I always say close mid-April so that you have time to advertise your property, even just a little bit before April is good, so that you have time to advertise and get tenants in for May 1st. Because as I said, a lot of students are moving as of May 1st. Can students say no for showings because they have online classes from home or exams? So as a landlord, when you give notice to tenants that you will access the property in 24 hours notice, they can really stop you from showing the property. However, it comes to, as I said, we don't want to, so we can either, there's 2 ways of doing things. There's approaching it from a standpoint, it is my right and I will do it whether you agree or not. That is one way, but I find that way doesn't always work. So the best thing to do is to always cooperate with them. If they have exams, I would rather we don't show that room, just so we respect their privacy and we respect that they're students and they have exams. So they can't really legally hold you back. They can suggest a different time, especially if they have a good, reasonable reason. However, as I say, like the best thing to do is to make sure that we're working with their schedule, which is why it's best to avoid selling in April because they have exams, and that's a good reason to want to suggest a different time. The challenge is when there's 5 students in a property and they have 5 different schedules, especially in April where they have exams, there's always someone who has an exam, but the best way to go around that is to basically sell before it gets busier. And I also like that when we sell before it gets busier, it does give you the time to give notice to the tenants that a new owner will be taking over, or if they want vacant position, you do have the time to give notice so that they're out as of May 1st. Question number, let me see, I think there's another question here. How many tenants do you require in a rental property to profit $1,000 a month? Or does it depend on how much you purchase the property for? Thanks. So my properties that are cash flowing $1,000 a month are not single family homes. A lot of student rentals are single family homes, but my properties are cash flowing that high because a lot of them have 2 to 3 units. So the ones that I have as student rentals cash flow about, I'm gonna say $400 a month. I also have actually a unique model for student rentals. So this is something that we can talk about, but I do have an interesting model. When I rent my student rentals, I do it differently than a lot of my clients are doing it, and that's something that we can discuss. The reason I do it differently is because the way I do it brings a higher return. So that is something we can also discuss. But yeah, I do have a student rental that's cash flowing about $500 a month, and it's a variable rate mortgage. So when my rate was lower, it used to cash flow about $1,000. So now that the mortgage has gone up because it's variable, it's cash flowing about 400, but that's okay. However, when I rent out my student rentals, I definitely use a different model, and I'd be happy to discuss that. I learned it from one of my long-term clients who's been doing this for years. She has a lot of student rentals, and she's really good at it. So that is something that I'm willing to share as well. If somebody wants to buy more student rentals, or they want to learn more about my method, I'm happy to discuss that. It's pretty cool. Which location would be better if we need to purchase a student rental, Guelph or Kitchener-Waterloo? So I believe this is an investor who's asking. I prefer Guelph as opposed to Kitchener, because I find that Kitchener-Waterloo has a lot of high-rise buildings. They have a lot of options for student rentals. I like Guelph because we don't have enough inventory. In fact, guess what? I was speaking to one of my friends who's a professor at the University of Guelph, and he was just telling me how the university is increasing the student body. So here in Guelph, we already have a shortage of student rentals. We have a shortage of housing for the average person, just the average, the regular tenants. So we don't have enough homes. So that's why I'm thinking that Guelph is better than Kitchener, just because Kitchener has a lot of those high-rise buildings that they built around the university, which increases the supply and therefore maybe impacting how much you can get for a unit. What should be the main factors I should look at in the location if I'm going to buy student rentals? What should you be looking at in a location when you're going? So actually, this question, I'm going to answer it this way. I have another webinar that's coming, and I think it's in March, and it's going to talk about buying student rentals. So if you're interested in buying a student rental, I think you should check out that webinar as well. We can dive deeper into buying a student rental. Today, we're mostly focusing on selling student rentals for those who are looking to sell. However, if you're looking to buy a student rental, I'm happy to chat about that as well, especially in that webinar that's coming in March. Any other questions? Okay, I have a few more questions for social media. I have a question here from social media, and is, if we renegotiate the lease with existing students who are tenants, do we need to give them money as compensation? To be honest, it depends on your situation. It depends on your negotiating skills, and also it depends on the needs of the tenants. If you're renegotiating a lease, you have to give them something in return, And I also find that the way I run my business, and this is my my investor business as well, my tenants, I always look for win-win situations, because I feel like if I bring in a solution that only works for me, someone will complain, So if I was renegotiating my leases, I'd make sure that I give them something, and I would find out what's important to them, and then see if I can give them that. For example, if they want the house to be like I did this a few years ago with one of my tenants. They wanted the house to look nice, for me to do a whole renovation that spent 40,000 on, but I'm not going to do that if they're paying the existing rent. So it came from them that if I was to, renovate the property, make it really nice and beautiful, nice finishes, they would be willing to pay higher rent. In that case, I'll go back to my bank and see if I have enough money, if I'm in a position to do that. And yes, at that time, I was in a position to be able to do a 40,000 renovation without, enough notice. So I did it. My property went up in value. It was actually a win-win for both of us. My property went up in value. It was easier maintaining over time. But they also got a beautifully looking home that's nicely renovated. So it was a win-win situation in that case. And I also make sure, even in that situation, I make sure that we sign paperwork that says this idea came from them. They had the right to consult. They have their own legal advice, and that I'm not forcing them into doing it. Because if you increase rates or you negotiate leases illegally, the tenants have the right to go back and sue you or complain to the LTB. So you have to make sure that whatever you're doing, you're involving professionals who are protecting you as a landlord. So to answer the question, in terms of renegotiating leases, make sure that there's a win-win for them, that there's something in for them, just because win-win solutions are better long-term. And also make sure that you're well protected, that everything you do is in writing and that they sign saying that they forgo their right to sue. And I always tell them, I was like, you know what? A lot of problems have come up. A lot of people have complained. If you complain, the LTB will take your side. So I need to make sure that we're signing proper paperwork. You want me to renovate this property, you're willing to pay more. I want us to put that in writing. So we always put that in writing ahead of time because I don't want trouble after. So that's about that. Let's see if I have any more questions. I think we've gone, oh, I have here a question about pre-construction. Should I buy pre-construction as student rentals? Again, as I said, this is something that we can discuss at my next webinar about buying student rentals. But I am aware, especially in the Kitchener-Waterloo area, they have these high-rise buildings that they've been building, and they build them as student rentals because they're very close to the university. And they even offer management services. I personally do not subscribe to that because, yes, they might offer to manage your property for 2 years, but what happens after the 2 years? You know, and I think it's also rent guaranteed for like 1 year. However, I just don't subscribe to it. And I find that in the fine print, sometimes one of the buildings I was helping one of my clients buy it. They were buying it because their son was moving to Waterloo to study at Waterloo University. However, when I read the fine print, I read that no other manager can manage that building. So if you need management services, you always have to go through them, and they will charge you 8%, and that eats into your cash flow. I find that buildings usually don't cash flow as well. So you're not going to get $1,000 cash flow from those kind of units, and you won't get the return that you desire. So for me, when it comes to student rentals, I prefer to buy properties that I can have 4, 5, 6, 7 rooms, and if possible, multiple units. That pre-construction right now has a lot of problems, especially for people who bought these units. And this is a whole separate topic, but we do have a few more minutes so I can address this. A lot of people who are investing in pre-construction right now, they're having problems because a lot of them bought these units, let's say a year ago, when rates were at 0.25%, and the payments were like, $1,100, $1,200. It was nothing. And now we're seeing, with rates being so high, a lot of those are closing and their mortgage payment is like $4,000. I saw a file about 2 weeks ago where the builder was estimating that the occupancy fees, the fees that they paid to the builder before closing, would be about $1,700, right? So the family bought it thinking that their monthly payment would be about, $1,700, and they can rent it out for $2,500. They're still cash flowing. But right now, with the way rates are, the builder's charging them 6% interest, and their monthly payments like $4,000 to the builder. So they're paying $4,000, but they still are only getting about $2,500 in rent. So they're having to put $1,500 into the property every month. So that is stressful, but it's happening a lot with pre-construction. Another thing that's happening too with pre-construction is that a lot of those units aren't appraising. So we have people who bought properties for like 1.5, but right now they're only appraising for like 800 or 900. Maybe in good cases, 1.1. The bank is only going to give you a loan for 1.1, and you have to come up with a difference. So I'm seeing that right now, people who are banking on pre-construction, it's pretty hard. It's a tough situation to be in. So if you're looking to buy pre-construction, I'd say just do your due diligence. I'm also seeing a lot of builders take advantage of this situation. I see here a comment that say pre-con is for long-term investment. You're right, especially if you buy at the right price. My concern is that when it's not cash flowing and you have to put in money on a monthly basis, how long can you do that for? Like the family that's putting in 1,500 every month, can they do that for 4 years? I don't know, you know? So it's definitely something where like someone has to do their due diligence and make sure that they basically understand the pros and cons. And to be honest, with investment, it always goes up and down, but just make sure that whatever you're buying, the property you're buying makes sense. Again, this is a webinar about selling, so we shouldn't talk much about buying, but it's a topic that I'm always passionate about, especially if I can educate people based on what I'm seeing right now in the industry. So we are at 11:55. We'll just end the webinar a little early, just 5 minutes early. But I'd like to take this moment to thank you for being here. I see that, you know, there's a lot of things that are happening in the industry, and I'm glad that we can come here and discuss them. For everyone who asked a question, thank you very much. I hope that your questions were answered. If you'd like to discuss this further, I'm always passionate about this, talking to other investors, even parents who are here and they want to buy a property for their student to move in. I see that as an investment, right? Because this is your hard-earned money that you're putting in a property. So I think it would be best if this property can bring the return that you desired. So I still consider that as an investment, and I'm very passionate about these things. So I thank you again for being on this webinar. I hope that you learn something that will propel you towards achieving your goals as investors. And I hope that this was helpful.